Hey guys, I want to talk to you from the Psalms. We rarely from the Psalms. I don't know why, but I rarely do. But I want to talk to you this morning from Psalm 27, um, calling this anxiety's antidote. That's my Baptist and my literalization there. Um, looking for a third. I was looking for a third A, but I couldn't come up with. But I want to talk to you about how do we deal with anxiety, fears that come as a result of stressful times. Psalm 27. There's 14 verses to the psalm. Relatively speaking, it's a short psalm. Believed by David. So what I'd like us to do is we're just going to read we're going to read all of the opening text, and then we'll come back and we'll come back and we'll extract some life out of this text. Is that all right?
Sounds good.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
I hear you.
Psalm 27, we'll start with verse 1. Someone want to read we'll split up. Someone read the next 4 verses for us, please.
The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. Oh, you want me to keep going or somebody else?
Somebody else pick up the next 4 verses, please.
For in the day of trouble, he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of his sacred tent, and set me high upon a rock. Then my head will be exalted above the enemies who surround me. At his sacred tent, I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music to the Lord. Keep going.
Yep.
Hear my voice when I call, Lord. Be merciful to me and answer me. My heart says of you, seek his face, your face, Lord, I will seek.
Right. Someone close out the rest of the verses for us, please.
Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my helper. Do not reject me or forsake me, God my Savior. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Teach me your way, Lord. Lead me in a straight path because of my oppressors. Do not turn me over to the desire of my foes, for false witnesses rise up against me, spouting malicious accusations. I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and take heart and wait for the Lord.
Yeah, Psalm 27 is a psalm that provides for us an antidote for anxiety. As you read the verses, I'm sure, like me, many worship songs came to mind as you read specific verses, like, that was that song. That's that song. Psalm 27 is a verse that provides a prescription, an antidote for fear and the anxiety that comes from fear. We think about fears and anxiety. You know, when we're young, we have fear of things, right? When we're kids, we fear clowns. We have fear of darkness. I'm an adult, and I still have. I don't call it a fear of darkness. I just say that I am uncomfortable with darkness. We have all kinds of fears and anxieties, monsters and boogeyman. Then when we become teenagers, we deal with fears and anxieties. We deal with fear of rejection, fear of failure. We deal with the fear that comes from not meeting peer pressure. And then we become adults. And when we become adults, man, that's a whole nother set of fears and anxieties. We have the fear of disease, we have the fear of financial problems, particularly for those of us, if we think about what they tell us in terms of the advances in medicine. You know, I work in the health insurance medical space now, and what they're saying is that many people are going to be living into their 90s now, and they're, man, is my money going to last? Do I have enough money in retirement? All this stuff, right? Fear of broken relationships, the fear of being left alone, fear of dying. Fear and anxiety are a part of life. Just like last week, we talked about trials and difficult situations, and how God uses them to shape and develop our character because they're an inevitable part of life. Dealing with fear and anxiety is an inevitable part of life. The challenge becomes, how do I navigate them? Because if I can't, and fear grips me, fear can rob me of joy, can rob me of peace. When I'm overwhelmed with fear and anxiety, what usually happens to my ability to rest and have a good night's sleep?
It's interrupted.
It's interrupted, keeps me up at night, occupies my mind. An antidote for anxiety. David wrote this 27th Psalm when he was going through probably what could be considered the most fearful time of his life, right? And when we think of David, we think of David as the man after God's own heart. We think of David as the giant slayer. We think of David in a lot of different ways. But we don't necessarily think of David from the sense of somebody who was overwhelmed and struggled with fear. We know David. We know the story of David. David was a shepherd boy. He was anointed to be king of Israel. And under that anointing, he took out the giant. And when he took out the giant, the people were praising David, and Saul gave David his daughter for a bride, made him a general in the army. And David went out and led Israel against the Philistines, and they had all of this victory. And the people were singing the song, hey, Saul has killed 1,000, but David has killed 10,000. And David had all of his accolades, right? And here's David living with the ideal and the knowledge that he has been anointed to be king. But it didn't all turn out that way for David. David ended up having to run for his life. Saul set out to kill David. David ended up spending years on the run, running for his life, trying to preserve his life. He was so fearful that David ran to the Philistines for comfort, for protection. The same people he had been fighting against on behalf of Israel, he ran to them for comfort and for protection. David ran and he hid in the cave of Adullam. And all of us, if you know the story of David, you understand about the power of the imagery of the cave of Adullam. David ran and he hid there. And while David was on the run, Jonathan, Saul's son, who he and David had formed this great bond, this great intimate bond. They were tight, and Jonathan came to David. And I want you to see this text here in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 3. This is a conversation between David and Jonathan, as David's on the run for his life from Jonathan's father. David expresses this. He says, "As surely as the Lord lives and you live, there is only one step between me and death." That sounds like a man that's overcome, overwrought with the weight, the pressure of fear and anxiety. And he had every good reason to, because Saul was out after his life. And it's in this context that it is believed that David writes the 27th Psalm at some time during this period in which he is running from his life. David prescribes for us our antidote for anxiety in ancient times. What I want to do here is real simply unpack this text in the Psalms and take a look at two things. What are the cause of our fears and anxieties? And what is the cure for our fears and our anxieties? First thing we want to look at, what is the cause of our fears and anxieties? It's inevitable, right? The inevitability of fearful times. There will be times when we all face fearful and anxious circumstances in our lives. It's not will you, it's when, right? Look at what David says in his text in the second verse here. Someone read the second verse for us.
When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is mine enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall.
Yeah. See here we live in a especially right now. Is anybody watching the news last week? I try not to watch a lot of news. I really don't anymore. But the heat wave that has been going on, not just here, but in Europe, was melting. You see that melted streets? They had to shut down the airports because the runways were melting.
Wow.
Yeah, I saw it, David. I saw it, James.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I didn't know that.
So David says, when the wicked advanced against me, we live in fearful times. We live in a dangerous world. Tragedy, sickness, disease, injury, disaster, death can come upon us at any time. Life could change for us like that. I have a brother and a nephew. For them, on vacation, life changed like that. We all know it to be true. That's what happened to David. David goes from being celebrated, he goes from being praised, he goes from being at the height of popularity to now he's on the run, running for his life. He says, when the wicked advanced against me to devour me. I want us to look through these verses and see all the sources of trouble that could have caused David to be completely paralyzed by fear. So in this psalm, these are all the verses that David kind of lays out for us as the cause of fear. He says, evil men advancing against me, enemies and foes attacking me, armies besieging me, trouble surrounding me, his parents rejecting him, false witnesses lying on him. Anybody ever feel surrounded? Anybody ever feel like your enemies and your foes are coming at you on every side?
Yep.
From David's perspective, everywhere David turns, he sees potential danger, destruction, and violence. Here's the reality for us as Christians. It's impossible to escape external factors in our life. For David, it was these external dynamics. For you and I, it may be a completely other set of external dynamics that are bringing pressure, that are bringing anxiety, that are causing fear to come into our life. Fear of loss of this, that, fear of this happening, fear of this not happening. The principle for us is we don't have to live every day in anxiety. We don't have to live every day with anxious thoughts, fears, worries that cripple us, that weigh us down, that keep us from having peaceful sleep, that every time we sit down, those pervasive, overwhelming thoughts creep in and start to cripple you and crowd out your joy. We can't escape external pressures coming against us. The challenge is, how is it that you and I respond? So what is the cure for fearful, anxious times? What's the cure? Principles for us. David doesn't begin this psalm talking about all his troubles. When you look at verse 1, David begins the psalm and he begins talking about God. He begins putting his focus on God. The first thing David tells us in the psalm is, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? First principle for us to understand a cure for fearful times is we can focus on our problems and be overcome with fear, or we can focus on God and overcome our fears. Now, that sounds like semantics, right? That sounds like real simple, real easy preacher talk. We can focus on our problems and be overcome with fear. We can focus on God and overcome our fears. But the reality is, all of that lies within our own ability by what we choose to dictate, to dominate, and direct our thought lives. So the very first thing for us to understand as we face all this pressure, all this stuff around us, the very first thing for us to understand as a cure is I have to trust in God's presence. I have to trust in God's presence. This is why David makes this statement. He says, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? What stands out for you in terms of David's in this pressure cooker, man? He's running for his life. We may not have a king chasing us down to try to take our life, but man, we're beset with problems and challenges and stresses and demands that we feel we can't meet, causing all of this internal anxiety. And David makes this kind of declarative statement. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? What's the first thing David declares about God in this text?
That God is his all in all, basically. He's everywhere. He's in every thought, every decision that David makes.
Yeah, he says, the Lord is my light and my salvation. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Have you ever noticed how comforting a light can be when you're in a dark place?
Oh yeah, I've got nightlights all over my house.
So you're like me, Mona. You're uncomfortable in the dark. I'm not afraid of the dark. I'm just uncomfortable in the dark.
I'm afraid I might stumble. You bet. I don't want to break anything.
Yeah. See, light helps to dispel fears. David said, God is my light and my salvation. David, you got to put yourself in his space, man. That David found himself, he is surrounded by the darkness of trouble and danger. Everything, everyone that David has known, the people who celebrated him, who walked with him, who fought with him, everybody's turned against David, and David is literally running for his life. The priest that helped David when David ran to the temple, Saul ended up killing all of those priests. So in David's mind, where can I go, man? What can I do? He was so desperate, he ran to his enemies. Think about the darkness that David must have been feeling in those times. Think about the darkness you feel in your worst moment, the moment that you're most fearful, the moment you are most anxious about. And what David came to understand, and Melissa, you alluded to this, is there is value in God's presence. There was value in God's presence. He said, God's presence is my light and it's my salvation. The light of the Lord's presence can drive away all fears. When we're going through stuff, we will generally try to find salvation, rescue, deliverance, help in a lot of different things and people. Think about when you're going through. Who do you call? Who do you reach out to? How do you respond? Some people turn to alcohol. Some use drugs, prescribed and non-prescribed. Some turn to doctors, right? To get that legal drug that can calm their fear and anxiety. Here's a fact. This is kind of a sobering fact here. Fear-driven anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the US. 40 million adults. That's 1 in 5 people. And this was a data point that was prior to COVID. So if you recall, all during COVID, the mental stress, the anxiety and disorder, I bet that's probably 2 in 5 now. Right? David said, man, in the midst of what I'm going through, in my darkest times, I had to find a way to get into God's presence. The Lord is my light. He didn't say the Lord provides light. He didn't say the Lord brings light. He said the Lord is my light. The Lord is my salvation. David said the cure for my anxiety, the cure for my fearful, anxious moments when I'm feeling the darkest is I got to trust God's presence. There's an old adage, old wise saying that says, no Christ, no peace. And those of you who don't have your screen up, that's N-O, N-O, no Christ, no peace. And then the contour to that is no Christ, K-N-O-W, no peace. So if God isn't at the center of my universe in the midst of darkness and trials and fears and anxiety, the likelihood that I'm going to be able to have peace ain't going to happen. That's why so many people are medicated. Now, this isn't to speak against or speak ill of people seeking treatment for mental health. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is we all experience difficult, pressing times that create and cause anxiety and fear. The pill alone, the prescription alone, can't be the remedy alone. It can't be the remedy alone. But if I know I have a relationship, I experience Christ, I depend on Christ, I seek Christ, then the inevitable result for that for me is going to be I'm going to know peace. Can anybody think of a verse where Jesus gave us a promise about anxiety and fear?
Yeah, where he told us.
The one that say, oh, I'm sorry. Go
Go ahead,
ahead.
Brenda. Go ahead, Brenda.
The one that say, don't be anxious.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what book it's in, but it say, don't be anxious for anything, but give thanksgiving in everything. Something to that effect.
Yeah, that's Philippians. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How
I know he
about,
told us. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Mona.
how about, be not afraid, I go before you always.
Mm-hmm.
What was you gonna say, Marv?
Those are some good ones. Where he told us to seek his kingdom first
Yeah.
and his righteousness. Matthew, what's that? 6:33.
I think of these things have I spoken unto you, that in me may have peace.
Mm-hmm.
In the world there's tribulation, but take
Mm-hmm.
for I have overcome the world.
Oh, that's a good one too. That's John.
So again, dark times come. What do I focus on? Where do I put my energy? So David taught us that the first principle was to trust in God's presence. God's presence brings light, right? God's presence brings light. God's presence brings help. The Lord is my light and my salvation. The next thing David said was, I have to trust in God's protection. I have to trust in God's protection. So I'm going to read that verse for us. The second part of that verse is highlighted.
The Lord is the stronghold of my life, and whom shall I be afraid?
Yeah, the Lord is the stronghold of my life. And these are terms and phrases that for our culture don't really mean much as they did when David wrote that. That word stronghold, that's a military term that refers to a fort or a fortress. A stronghold is a place of walled protection and safety that cannot be penetrated by the enemy. David is saying the Lord is my place of protection. The Lord is my place of safety. The Lord is the place that I can run into and the enemy can't touch me there. The stress, the darkness, the anxiety, the circumstances that cause them and shape them and drive them, they persist. But when I run into the Lord, when I trust his presence and I trust his protection, I find safety for my heart, for my mind, right? What David is talking here is about a home security system for your heart. How many of us have a home security system?
Yep.
Right? You do that so nobody gets in, right? So you can feel comfortable and safe that your stuff is protected. Some people put deadbolt locks on their doors, right? They put iron chain link fences all around their homes, right? Some sleep with it. Might be some of us. I'll leave that alone. I was going to go down there. Some people have loaded pistols. You're going to find more and more people buying weapons now, right? More and more people getting licensed to carry. We getting crazy open carry laws, right? And more people are going to be pursuing buying a firearm, keeping a firearm, carrying a firearm. Why? Trying to find ways to bring protection for themselves. But what David is saying here is, I know that when it comes to my heart, my peace of mind, my internal emotional security and well-being, I know the only one that can protect me, that can provide the protection for that. It isn't security system, alarm systems, a gun or pepper spray or mace or whatever. He says it's the presence of God and it's the protection of God. The Lord is my place of protection, my walled protection, my fortress in fearful times. Look what he says in Psalm 27:4. One thing I ask from the Lord, and this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. Why? Watch what he says. For in the day of trouble, see, for in the day of trouble, when I'm feeling at the end of my rope, when I'm stressed to the max, when I'm feeling anxious and fearful, and I'm overwhelmed and I can't sit and have a peaceable thought, not even for 5 minutes. That's the day of trouble. When I'm fearful that my money can't keep up with the rate of inflation. When I'm fearful about my job circumstances, situations, or trying to find a job, or trying to find somewhere to live, or being able to keep up with rent, all the stuff, the external causes. He says, in the day of trouble, he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of a sacred tent and set me high upon a rock. When you and I are confronted, assaulted with fear and anxiety from life's pressures, David gives us a secret here. He says to trust God's presence, but not only trust God's presence, but trust God's protection And what we see here in verse 4 and 5 is the secret. In verse 4, what is the request of David's heart?
It
Is to
says
stay
one
in,
thing. Go on, my dear.
is to stay in God's presence at all times,
Yeah.
to seek him.
He says, one thing I've asked of the Lord, and only do I see. He said, man, I'm all, think about this. Listen, he ain't saying, Lord, get my enemy. He ain't saying, Lord, sickle. He said, no. Here's the thing I ask, because I'm convinced about his presence and his protection. So the only thing I'm asking for, Lord, I ain't asking you to stop it. I ain't asking you to cease it. He says, I just need to get in your presence. I just need to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. Why? So I can gaze, focus of God's beauty, not my problems, not the circumstances, not the situations. This man is running for his life. And in the midst of this real deal scenario, he's not saying, crush my enemy, Lord, get Saul, he doing me wrong, he doing me dirty, take care of me. He says, no, Lord, I just want to get into your presence. Because here's the deal. If I can't get into your presence, if I don't have a desire to seek God, if I don't have a desire to dwell in the house of the Lord. Now, in David's day, what is it that the house of the Lord represented?
His presence.
Wasn't it shelter as well?
So it's presence, shelter. But what was it that they referred to as the house of the Lord in David's day?
Was it the tabernacle?
Tabernacle.
Mm-hmm. That's why I said his presence. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And now, where does God
resided
in temples and tabernacles then, but where does God reside now?
In us.
In our hearts.
So it's turning in my heart inwardly.
Mm-hmm.
Turning inwardly from the pressures, the circumstances, the stresses, all the external stuff, all the causes of fear and anxiety, and now turning to God, seeking the Lord, dwelling in his house. That's communing with God in my heart, communing with God in my spirit. That's not necessarily running to the church. No, that's a heart thing. And then here's what happens. For in the day of trouble, he will keep me safe. See, if I don't have the desire, one thing I ask from the Lord, and this only do I seek. I'm not seeking your hand, God. I'm seeking your face. I'm not seeking your hand. He said, the only thing I seek is to be in God's presence and to be overwhelmed by the beauty of the Lord. One thing that I desire of the Lord. Thinking of my boy Donnie. Okay, listen. That is what positions him to be in a place of protection. For in the day of trouble, he will keep me safe in his dwelling. But he can't keep me safe in the dwelling if that's not my desire to be positioned there when the pressure comes. He will hide me in the shelter of a sacred tent, and he will set me upon a rock. Notice, David starts here in verse 4 about what he desires as it relates to God. In verse 5, he talks about what God will do as a result of his desire. See, a lot of times when we're going through it, we want to be in his dwelling. We want to be in the shelter of his sacred tent. We want God to set us high upon a rock, to kind of elevate us above the stress, the anxiety, the fears, the worries, the concerns, the doubt. We want God to do that. But what David is helping us to understand, in order for God to do his part, it begins with my desire. It begins with my desire. You and I have to hunger. We have to desire. We have to seek. We have to prioritize his presence. If we prioritize his presence, we receive the benefit of his protection. Third thing and the last thing is the cure for fearful times. David said, I got to trust in God's presence. He's my light and my salvation. I got to trust in God's protection because he's going to put me in his dwelling place. He's going to protect me. He's going to elevate me. He's going to put me in his walled fortress. And then I have to trust in God's perfect timing. Psalm 27, 13 and 14. Someone read that for us, please.
I remain confident of this, that I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord.
Yeah. What do you hear on first glance when you look at these last two verses in this psalm?
You have to have patience. You have
Yeah.
to wait.
Yeah, wait. That's what I was going to say. Wait.
Waiting. And notice the word that David frames all of this, he frames it in a word. He says, I remain confident of this. See, I can't have patience if I ain't confident. If I'm not convinced that he got me, if I'm not convinced that his presence has value, that he can protect me, if I'm not convinced, I'm never going to trust his timing. David said, I remain confident of this, that I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And because I'm confident of that, I can wait. Because I'm confident that God's got me. I'm confident that he's going to protect me. I'm confident, not about me, not about my circumstances. I'm confident about God. David's faith, and this is something we have to learn as believers in today's context. David's faith was very realistic. David knew his troubles would not soon go away. Remember, we read, David said, as Saul was chasing him down for his life, David said, here's the one thing, Lord, I'm asking of you. I just want to be in your presence. I just want to dwell in your house and gaze on your beauty. He wasn't asking for Saul to be dealt with or stopped. And a lot of times for us as believers today, our first thing is we always want God to alleviate the causes from us. We're not willing to experience God and learn about God and grow from God and depend on God in the midst of the causes of fear and anxiety. We have been wrongfully taught that God wants to eliminate all causes of fear and anxiety and pressures and stress in the life of the Christian. And as a result, there's not a deepness of confidence in who God is. And we can't say what David says, I remain confident of this. David understood that his troubles would not soon go away simply because he went into the presence and the protection of God. He knew that he couldn't just wave a magic wand and all his enemies would just disappear. Y'all heard me say this time and time again, like when COVID broke out and Christians were praying for the virus to go away. And I said, then, no, not going to happen. He's not going to deliver us out. He's going to deliver us through. Because that's his character. That's his nature. If I read, let me stop. I was going to say something that was that could have been sounded very judgmental. Let me stop. The Hebrew word that David uses here in verse 14 when he says, wait. He says, wait for the Lord. This is an interesting meaning because that word wait, it conveys the ideal. Watch this now. Help me, Lord. Help me. It conveys the ideal of taking a weak cord or thread and wrapping that weak cord or thread around a stronger rope, giving that weaker cord or thread greater strength. That's the picture of this word wait. It doesn't just mean like you sitting in the doctor's office or the dentist's office. Well, I'm just going to wait. I'm just going to, just going to wait. Let time. It's not talking about time going by as much as it's talking about an attitude of heart and place in how you and I place our expectations in the midst of fearful and stressful times. Taking a weak cord or thread and wrapping it around a stronger rope. As a result, giving that weaker cord or thread a greater strength. I am confident of this, that I'm going to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And I'm going to wait for the Lord. In other words, I'm going to take my doubts. I'm going to take my fears. I'm going to take my uncertainties. I'm going to take my anxieties. I'm going to take all of my stuff. I'm going to take my limited ability to respond, to address, to persevere. And I'm going to wrap all of that around the strength of God's character, God's nature, God's integrity, God's power, God's consistency. I'm going to wait for the Lord. And as I wait for the Lord, what's the inevitable result? Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. Be of good courage. Why? Because I've wrapped my weakness around his strength. We have to wrap the cord of our weakness, the cord of our faith around God. And then do one simple thing. Hold on until God brings a resolution to our troubles in his time and in his perfect way. Does anybody know how long David ran from Saul?
Was it 3 years?
Longer than 3. The point, here's the point. It was a while. It didn't get resolved overnight. It wasn't simple. It wasn't easy. David had to persevere in his faith towards God, in his waiting for God. So waiting for God isn't just about letting time pass. It's about wrapping my faith around his strength, wrapping my confidence around his strength. When I can't have faith, when I can't have confidence, wrapping that around his strength. That word wait speaks to a dependence upon God. And as a result, the more and more that I'm able to be dependent upon God, I can do the second part of that verse, which is to be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. David learned in the darkest times, David understood that I've got to trust God's presence. I've got to trust God's protection. And I've got to trust God's perfect timing. I used to sing this song in with the Pennsylvania Male Singing Association. You can't hurry God. You know, you just have to wait. You have to trust him and give him his time, no matter how long it takes, because he may not come when you want him, but he's right on time. And while I'm waiting, there's a confidence that's required on my part. There's a confidence that's required to be able to trust that God's got me, that he's going to uphold me. Not that he's going to make it all vanish and go away, but in the midst of it, there's strength that he's able to add and provide to my heart. There's a peace he's able to give me. There's a joy he's able to give me. There's a confidence that I'm able to walk in, even though I'm in the darkest season of my life, even though the external causes of fear and anxiety aren't going away. In the midst of it, I can have an antidote. I'll leave you with this thought. One of God's most amazing creations is the African impala. It's like a deer. Now, this African deer has the ability to jump an incredible 10 feet high in a distance of 30 feet in the air. I want you to think about that. It could jump 10 feet high and a distance of 30 feet in the air. And yet, it can be confined to any enclosure with a 3-foot high wall. How is that possible? Something that has all of that capacity to jump 10 feet high, 30 feet in distance, can be confined in an area that is a 3-foot high wall. It's possible. It's possible because the impala is not restrained by the 3-foot high wall, but rather by its own fears. Here's why. The impala will not jump if they cannot see where their feet will land. If they can't see where they're going to be landing, even though they can jump 10 feet high, 30 feet in distance, they're not going to jump over that 3-foot wall because they can't see what's on the other side. Faith is the ability to trust what we cannot see. And when we trust by faith, when we trust God's presence, we trust God's protection, we trust God's perfect timing, our fears and anxieties can't limit us, can't keep us trapped, can't keep us bound, can't keep us locked in, can't keep us from envisioning and imagining something better, something different for our lives, whatever the area, whatever the circumstance, whatever the situation, be it our health, be it our finances, be it our relationship, be it our careers, be it our marriage. Cure for fearful times. Trust God's presence, God's protection, God's perfect timing.